Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Azrieli Center for Israel Studies at the Ben-Gurion Research Institute here at the Ben-Gurion University of the Negev in Israel. This is our second meeting at the seminar we are doing online about nation building in the world. Last year actually, we had our first meeting that we had, and we talked about North Korea. And this year and this month, this second time that we meet, we are heading westwards to a country that has been very much on the news headlines since August 13, 2020, when Israel and the United Arab Emirates and the United States have agreed on the normalization of the relations between Israel and the UAE. And since we have heard a lot about this country, but we don't know much about the nation building of the UAE, we have the pleasure and the honor to host today assistant professor at the University of Wollongong in Dubai, Mr. Ουίλιαμ Γκερές, who is now online with us. Welcome, Professor Γκερές. I would like to good afternoon from Israel. I would like to say some words about Professor Γκερές. Before coming to the UAE in 2004, he taught history of colonization for 3 years at the Sorbonne Paris 1 and geopolitics at the University of Marne-la-Vallée. At the American University in Dubai and the American University in the Emirates, he taught extensively over many years, many areas in international relations, such as global governance, nation branding, conflict resolution, international politics, and diplomacy in the Middle East and Asia. At the University of Wollongong in Dubai, his focus is the UAE foreign policy and international cooperation, as well as the non-traditional security topics, migrations, demographics, and the coronavirus crisis that we know what this means even in the political area. So we are getting started. Professor Γκερές, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gavriήλ, for your kind introduction. So hello to everybody. To start with, I have a presentation. So I'm going to use some slides, and not all my slides because it's a 2-hour presentation. Nonetheless, so I will try to keep my time, the 20 minutes that are allocated. And to start with, so the most important is to understand why I wrote and what I have written about the UAE. The first thing is when I arrived here, it was a complete different world and not necessarily rational from a Western point of view. But because I'm specialized in geopolitics, I do believe that actors in general are rational actors, meaning, so if they do something, it's for a reason. Starting from these statements, I try to understand the underlying logics of the Emirati society. And so afterwards, I specialized in international relations and foreign policy. So main concern here is precisely if we want to bridge perhaps the gap or at least the distance between the UAE and Israel, I think it's mandatory to understand how the Emiratis think. And it could be very pretentious. So it took me 7 years to finalize a book that came out at IB Taurus in 2017. So precisely because I wanted, as we do in history or geopolitics, I deconstructed so the structures to see how the people, how the decision makers in this country think and take decisions. So I'm a historian by training, so consequently, so I pay a great deal of energy to history and also to connected humanities or social sciences, for instance, anthropology. And I guess it's very important when you want to understand how the peninsula, so all GCC states, how they work, you need to go back to history, of course, but also anthropology. So today I wanted to develop on 3 different points. So the first one, of course, related to the making of the nation here in the UAE. The first are the anthropological roots of this country. How does it work and how, so on a daily basis, prior to colonization, although the British so wouldn't use colonization for the trucial states, but so how it works and how the people interact. The second point is more about the relation that the Emiratis has maintained with the world. How do they perceive the world? And how do they interact with other states? And finally, from 2004 onwards, the federal government has promoted not a policy of making a nation, but as Prime Minister said in Italy after independence, and so unity better. So after making the Italy, so we have to make the Italians, and that's something very related to this point. So I can develop on any aspect, but I will briefly broach the 3 topics and the three themes, and we can discuss afterwards if you want to. I'm going to share my screen, and to start with, so just the first thing that we need to understand are the underlying structures of this country. The first also statement is we are not in the West, and that's one of the main paradox or striking contrast that we can say about the UAE, because when you arrive in Dubai, for instance, it seems to the foreigners that we are in any global city. Actually, it could be true. That's also, we can work on this assumption, but under the surface, we have a very traditional country and a very traditional society. So what I wanted to tell you also about nation and making a nation in the UAE, in the wake of our following so many historians that we have no time to discuss, nation is a construction, is always a construction. So what are the different foundations of this nation? And also the thesis is this nation, if there is one, it's not like in the West. It's something which is specific, and we are going to describe it. So the problem is, how do we distinguish the UAE, the federal state, from the rest of the peninsula. Because when you look, for instance, at the map of the peninsula, and this one in particular with the different ethnic groups, there are no differences between the Saudi Arabia and the UAE from a geographic point of view. So very important statement to keep in mind that we need to alternate the different scales of analysis if we want to better understand how it works. And we don't have only, we would say, 3 scales. So the first one could be the global scale, the regional, the second, the regional, and finally the national. That's not how it works, because we can also go into details, and within the federation, there are also different scales. Each emirate, because the UAE is a collection, is a federation of 7 emirates. Locally, there are idiosyncrasies, particularities that we may analyze in a different light. So it's different in space, it's also different in time. Prior to the arrival of the British in the late 19th century until now, and I would say until the discovery of oil in the country, so we had a very traditional lifestyle. So it completely changed with oil royalties, with new budgets for the states, and consequently, so it impacted lightly the society there. But with the coming out of Dubai, if I may say so, in the late 20th century, so inevitably, so the major changes has triggered a redefinition of the nationhood, not to say the identity, because it's not exactly the same, the same word. So we can also discuss this aspect. I'm not going to say that, but when the federation becomes independent in 1971, the main objective of the first president, Sheikh Zayed, was to make sure that the federation would be independent and protected from its neighbors. Inevitably, when I say that, you say, oh yeah, of course, it's Iran. And as a matter of fact, Iran invaded on November 29, 1971, 3 islands in the Gulf, which belonged to the Emirate of Sharjah. But the main threat was Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia never accepted the creation of counterpowers at the fringes of its borders. And the main objective of the first president was therefore to protect and to build up a state and not to promote a nation. So the agenda is reversed if we compare with many European states, because most of the time in the literature, we know that we have a nation, and the movement of nationalities in Western Europe or in North America transform these communities, these imagined communities, into states. Well, it's a bit more complex, nonetheless, so that's a pattern that we could apply. It didn't work that way. In addition, so if we change slightly the scales to make sure that the 7 emirates stick together, the president had to grant local independence. And each emirate could be perceived and analyzed as a real country. So that's why in time and in space and in time, so the making of a nation was very different. As I told you, it changed in the late 1980s when Dubai, at the forefront of this process of modernization, so started to enter the global age. So borders have never been accepted because borders don't exist in the mindset of the Bedouins. So it's a traditional society crossing borders, moving back and forth, and with a very particular relationship to the environment. And we just want to show you here on this map, for instance, in 2005, after Sheikh Zayed died in 2004, the new president, the son of the late Sheikh Zayed, decided to publish and to issue this map, and it redefines the borders with Qatar. That was the original plan, to make a corridor along the Gulf, call it what you will, Arabian or Persian. So, and the Treaty of Jeddah did otherwise. So you can see on this map, for instance, that this corridor belongs to Saudi Arabia, making Qatar an enclave. So, lingering issues of borders because it's never accepted. And I would say in this mindset, in this perception of the world, states have never been accepted. Well, that said, is there a nation? That's my first point. Yes, there is a nation, and the Constitution in its Article 6 reads as follows. So the Union, and so that was a big debate between 1968 and 1971. So what could be the Union with Qatar, Bahrain, or even Oman? Say, in a nutshell, the UAE is a part of the great Arab nation. Consequently, what is a great Arab nation? So, and we have an indication on this map, and could be so these it could be one people, but of course there are objective factors that we can see here. You know, because you have read about nation building and construction, that there are objective factors in making nations. One of them here in the peninsula, I'm not saying in the Trucial state or in the UAE, is ethnic groups. You can see that the Arabs are spread all over the peninsula. And be careful, because Arabs has different meanings. You probably read, if you're interested in the history of the peninsula, that Sharif Hussein, so the Hashemite monarch, when he wrote to MacMahon during 1915 or 16 during the war, they were talking about the creation of state, Saudi state, and Sharif Hussein said, well, we have to put the border very low because there we don't have pure Arabs. Purity is a very complex concept in Islam, but also in the Arab societies. Nonetheless, so ethnic groups means that it's spread all over, and the people and Emiratis, Omanis, and Yemenis as well, they feel that they belong to one single group until today, even if the process of nationalization, so change the perception, nonetheless, so it's still that way. So religion is as well a common denominator as well as a lifestyle. So the Bedouin traditions has been maintained. So That's what I want to say for these anthropological roots. I just want to continue on the nation and the world, the perception of the world by the Emiratis. And I borrow the theory of Abdulmonem Al-Mashad, who is a professor from Cairo, and he described the perception of the world from an Emirati point of view with different concentric circles around the Emirates. The first circle is simply the Arabs. And when we say the Arabs related by the same blood. When two Arabs meet and they don't know each other, they try to find, well, imagine or real relations in the past. So kinship. Yet again, anthropology is very important. They are all related by blood. And the second circle is the Arab world. Well, Arab from the peninsula, the center of gravity, but also the Arabs of the different states of the Arab League. So the 22 states, for instance, even if they are not purely Arab. So the first is the nation could be, so the Arab in the peninsula, second the Arab, and the third circle is the one of the Muslim. Could be the Muslim states, but it could be more precisely the Ummah, so the community of the followers. So this one is very important in foreign policy because the Emiratis prefer to deal with Islamic countries instead of non-Islamic countries. And it entails in foreign policy preferences. As you can see on this map, for instance, so the foreign policy of the UAE is particularly active here in the Horn of Africa or in North Africa because they feel closer to Muslims in this country rather than the fourth circle, which is beyond. As far as you're concerned, I should say that outsiders, this is the term, outsiders, people not Arab from the peninsula, not Arab or not Muslim, they belong to this indistinct fourth circle. Consequently, in foreign policy, for instance, signing a defense agreement with the United States or with Britain is akin to, or it's exactly the same for the Emiratis. And I would say further, signing an agreement with Israel or with North Korea is roughly the same. Of course, it's a bit more complex than that, but in the perception of the world, these countries are outside the Ummah, outside the world, and consequently, so they are all equal. Very difficult to understand for us because we may, that's our culture. We say, yeah, but what about the GDP, development, and so on? No, absolutely not. So for the Emiratis, that's not how it works. The last point I wanted to finish with the making of the Emiratis. It started, and absolutely not a coincidence, when Sheikh Zayed died. Sheikh Zayed was not only the guardian, but the spiritual leader, so to speak, of the Emirati nation. So that was his responsibility to keep his children together. When he died, his older son, so Sheikh Khalifa, changed. So that's what I showed you, for instance, with Saudi Arabia. So they tried to say, well, all right, we signed a treaty, but it doesn't count. And it's exactly the same. So he had to bring more modern rules, so in government, but also lifestyle in the federation. That's the reason why. So to prepare the first elections in 2006, there was not a real debate. Same, some discussions about the participation of Emirati citizens to this process. And under the pressure of the West, the Americans, but also all states with democratic constitutions wanted to push the UAE in this direction. So interesting to see why they granted the vote. But I don't want to keep too long the floor. Just two things. So the first one, the debate about nation in the UAE was pretty active after 2005. So as I told you, and it's a very good, here is a very good quote from an intellectual who wrote that at the beginning of the 21st century, all Emiratis, they know who they are. They know that they are related to their family and so on. But the question is, the main question was for them, we know who we are, but who I am, but who are we? And the we is questionable because we cannot take it for granted. We cannot say the 1 million Emiratis living in the UAE, they share the same conception of nation. Some parts definitely, but not completely. For instance, in terms of allegiance. So many issues converged. The decision makers, the different leaders of this country had to tackle the main problem, which was youth unemployment, like in the Arab world in general. And it was particularly difficult to live because there were job opportunities, but not for the Emiratis. And so lack of education, of course, and that's the reason why at the GCC scale, so the Gulf Cooperation Council scale, so the idea was a nationalization. And here in the UAE, the Emiratization of the Emirates to bring more young people to key positions, and especially in the private sector. So it started to change, and making a nation topped the agenda, although it was not expressed or tagged that way. Nonetheless, so from the beginning of the century until now, so they tried to keep on making a nation with different elements. One of them is also women, very important. Women, Sheikh Zayed believed that they were the future of the country. I would say rightly. He opened the first female university in the Arab world, Zayed University. And by the same token, the Emiratis, the authorities, have paid attention to education. So they have reorganized completely the educational system from scratch, from primary school to university. Although university could be shared between private and public schools. However, so education is, of course, part and parcel of this nation process, analyzing the different textbooks in geopolitics. We do that to better understand how people think. So in these textbooks, the textbooks have changed. For instance, nobody emphasized anymore on the Palestinian cause. That's very surprising, but you might tell me why. And to finish with, so the last element of this nation is conscription. So the young Emiratis from 18 to 30, they have to enroll. So that's also, there are different ways to look at it. So first is to make sure that all Emiratis will have this common experience. We all know how it works since the 19th century in Europe, but also it's a good way to teach so the tenets of Islam, for instance, and to try to merge all young men in the crucible of the nation. I think that it's my time is over, and I just want to thank you, and I'm listening to your question. Thank you very much.
We thank you very much, and it was a very interesting and very enlightening view of what is going on in the Emirates, a country that I think I saw now, and I have understood that I have many things to discover about the Emirates, and I suppose that every one of us has the same idea. I would like to, before we start with the discussion, I would like to ask Professor Havatzelet Yael to make her remarks about what we have all heard, and of course, Professor Yael, she focuses on what is going on in the Bedouin society here in Israel, and especially in the southern part of Israel, at the Negev desert. And it would be, when I heard about the borders and land, this may have triggered me. This might have triggered us when we hear about the Bedouins in the Negev, in the south part of Israel. Professor Yael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Γκερές. Do you hear me well? Am I okay? Thank you. Thank you again for your great lecture. I was lucky enough to read some of your papers, one that you have sent me, that also follows some of the aspects that you discussed today. And I would like to mention them as well, because I think it is very...
Something's, okay.
I think it...
Something is wrong with the sound.
I'll try this way. Is it better?
No,
better.
Everything is fine. Everything is fine, Gavriήλ. Okay. We hear fine.
Okay. Okay, I'll try this way. Okay.
No, it's perfect. Havatzelet, we hear very well. Many times people don't hear because the problem is on their side. So just you talk before, it was fine.
Okay. So I would like to emphasize, because I'm part of our lab, I would like to emphasize the aspect of the work in the labor market that Professor Γκερές has emphasized. I think this is quite important for our understanding, and I would like to emphasize a little bit more on that. In one of his publication, Γκερές wrote that is in the Emirates, they are talking about qualitative nationalization. And I think that this is something which was highlighting for me. As Professor Γκερές mentioned, in the Emirates, the Emirates themselves, the citizens, are 1 million out of 8 million people. about 8 out of 8 million people. So the question of identity really comes up, and because demography is important, and in Israel we also discuss a lot about demography. Therefore, I think that the part of how the Emirates promoted the nation building, the concept of qualitative nationalism can be important for us. And as I understand, they dealt with, and as Professor Γκερές elaborated in his studies, they had a lot to do with understanding the labor market. So they try to focus on that aspect, and it's not a general working place. They understood that there are some specific topics that they should address via education, and within that, they opened and established places in which Emirates can become managers, can be more involved in the market. They picked up some aspects, mainly, as I understand, in the public sectors and in banking and in other companies, and try to make quotas of people that Emirates citizens that can be working that. And in that perception, they also, as he mentioned, also the woman contribution was very, very important, because women which did not work before now entering the labor market and becoming part of the working place. So there is a generational gap between the youngest, the younger people in the Emirates that have enough money even if they are not working, and the older population and their fathers, their grandfather, who used to work and has different perspective regarding daily life. And that brings me back to the situation also in Israel regarding the Bedouin population, because we also here in Israel have this gap between generation. The older generation that his perception was quite aspects of remembering nomadic population and wandering and working in specific jobs, tasks, herding, and the younger population who is now kind of Western people who have welfare and have education, and there is a gap between the older people and the younger people, and different perception regarding what life means and how to deal with a challenge that the modern states is offering to this population. And I think that what you have done, what the Emirates have done regarding quotas is something which is brought to light some advantages, and in the same times it brought us up also problems, because there are employers that said that blood or relation should not be a reason for receiving people for work, or they are saying that they are not as efficient as maybe other workers. And this is also bring us to the question of quotas also in Israel, in specific areas, like in the public sector, there need to be quotas, etc. So I think that even though the Emirates is very different from the challenges that we are having in Israel, and Israel based on different system, there are some resemblance that needs to be addressed while facing the entering to the Western world, or looking toward the Western world and the changes of the world employment system and everyday or daily life. So thank you very much for your contribution to our discussion and understanding of nation building, and I will be happy to continue the dialogue with your works. Thank you.
Following the remarks of Professor Yael, I would like to ask our host from Dubai, what is the conception of the nation of the UAE, of the state of the UAE? Actually, we are talking about formation, a state building, and not so, and less than a nation building, if I have understood well from your remarks.
If I may, so do you want me to answer after each participant's questions?
Yes. I am giving you now the having in mind the remarks of Professor Yael. I would like to ask additionally, because it is related, the new generation in the UAE, the younger that have born while the UAE exists. What are the differences of their conception towards the Emiratization of the Emirates vis-a-vis the conception that had their grandparents or their parents, that they did not know what an Emirati state is? And that comes together with the remarks of Professor Yael, which were very important from the aspect of labor and goals for life and what the state stands for.
Thank you, Gabriel, and thank you, Alex. So I can see that you read me, so that's always pleasant. So it's fair enough to mention it, because we live in a very difficult world. So, well, regarding what you said, we have to be careful also, because I could be more straightforward and to say the Emiratis, they want to work only if they are managers. That's also the problem. You know, it was like Israel until the 1950s. So you had too many doctors and graduates and no plumbers. So that's exactly, well, not the same, but if we change what needs to be changed, there are some comparisons. Because the Emiratis are willing to work in the private sector under certain conditions. Financial first, so they need to be well paid, because they are really well paid in the public service, but also at managerial level. So they cannot stand being in the middle management or doing some basic labor work. So that's also why. So the idea to instill some new Emiratis in the economy, so needed to really to train them well. So at least at college level, and not to say postgraduate level, to make sure that they could also succeed in the shift between not only the managers, but I would say the expats who hold control of the key economic companies or decisions here. So that's the idea, to replace them and never forget, like Iran, like Israel as well. So you share this perception that you are under siege. You and in the UAE, you're under siege because of your neighbor, but you're under siege because you're a minority in your country. Try to imagine if it was exactly the reverse in Israel, with 80% Arabs and 20% Israelis. So in the UAE, it's even worse than that. It's 90-10. So they need to feel in control. The problem is, if will not happen, but if all qualified people would have to leave the country, what would be left? The nationalization, the Emiratization, take this into consideration. So it's not to train, I would say, plumbers or manual people, although it changes a bit. So, and especially in the Northern Emirates, but it's to make sure that the Emiratis, they are at the center and they will keep on controlling their society. And they have also this idea that they are the chosen people, and so they cannot abide by any foreign rule or whatever. So this pride, very Bedouin, very Arab, is absolutely everywhere. So interacting with Emiratis is a real skill as well, because you need to understand that. That's why you were very so you were very politically correct, and so I would be a bit more straightforward, and so in the sense that they want to keep the control, and it's very clear, very pragmatic. They are not the only one, so they are absolutely everywhere. Gavriήλ, so you posed the question of the creation of the state. Well, there was no state. Mind you, if you can imagine in 1971, no state at all, no army, no university, no educational system, nothing. And precisely, the Emiratis had to rely on foreign power, on foreign manpower. And they felt that they were also in danger by doing that. Consequently, so you can see that the administration has its, how could I phrase it? It's very specific culture. It's a blend of Arab traditions, of high-tech management and managing things. So it's very surprising. But that said, people in the Emiratis working there, so they have a very particular conception of what they do there. Because first, they feel entitled to be there, and it's like it's a moral and societal contract. So the avatar of the client, of the patron-client relationship. So I'm there because I deserve to be there, because my father, because my name, and not because I'm qualified to do that. And that's the idea also. So when sometimes in some administration, you could see that the Emiratis, so they have the position, but underneath, so the middle management, so all the people, so they were more operative. So of course, we barely talk about it. There is literature on nationalization in the GCC. So there are some common denominators. However, it's one of the most important challenges to that the Emirati administration and state is facing. So it's still under construction. So we cannot say that there is still a state very solid. Although, when you see the differences between today and half a century ago, it's immense. It's from scratch. So keeping in mind that you have hostile neighbors. That's and they were. Well, even if they will never say that the Saudis are hostile, the Iranians, yes, but so the Saudis as threats of the country, difficult to. But when you talk to them, so that's very clear. So and they are different from their neighbor. Now, half a century later, we have also this process of nationhood at stake, and so it's still ongoing, and so Saudis can feel different from the Emiratis, from the Qataris as well. So The state contributed to that, yes. But also the state tries to incorporate the legacy, the tradition. We have a very conservative society here. And in terms of power, for instance, very important to maintain what exists. And it will, so the perfect world for, not only for the Emiratis, but I would say for the Arabs in the peninsula, is a changeless world. You're there, you don't move.
Yeah. Because
you're there. And so, and very difficult also to think of social mobility for when you have this. And WASTA is very important, the connections, so your role in the society, what your families, the links that your families maintain with the other families, where you are in around, it's like under the empires. So empires, I mean, Abbasid from Umayyad Abbasid or Ottoman, that's the same. So you're there, you're connected to the inner circle of power, and because you're there, so your children will go there. That's not necessarily consistent with a modern conception of the state. And that's the reason why many women, brilliant, I have outstanding students, they reach this glass ceiling because there are too many women. And in a very patriarchal society, too many women, too overqualified, they don't want them. So that's also a problem. And it changes demographics because the more educated you are, so the fewer kids you have, and so on and so on. So everything is, when I talk about identity crisis, is precisely that. It's so the gap between the generations is immense. I have, and even between my students who are so in the masters or they are in their 30s and their nephews, for instance, or their children. So they don't understand them. They don't understand how...
Very, very important and interesting facts. I hope that we are going to do the discussion a bit more quick, and so that you can answer as many questions as you can. Dr. Emir Galili wanted to pose a question. Please, let's do it one to one. Question, answer, and we have many more. So, Dr. Galili, please.
Hello, so my name is Amir. I'm a scholar of the Bedouin Society of the Negev. It was fascinating. I already sent you a paper of mine during the lecture, so you can check your inbox. I wanted to ask, on November 30th, it's the Memorial Day of the Emirate nation. It's Yom El Shahid. And I wanted to ask, do you recognize the beginning of some kind of civil religion in this country, symbols, celebrations, etc.?
No, it's tolerated, but the structures of the Emirati society is very Islamic. So they try to live. And you know that Islam is not a religion. Islam is a lifestyle. It's political, it's societal, it's religious as well, everything. And they try to live as much as it can. So that's also this fascination for not for the golden age of Islam, but something like this. So, and they are always extremely vigilant. They try also, because it's very important, to promote a tolerant reading of Islam. So with the Maliki school of law, and so that's very true. And tolerance. So they are very tolerant with the religions of the book, but also with the other religions. That's probably the main, but nonetheless, it's respect, it's tolerance, but imagine that it's like under the Ottoman Empire, or that, or just under the Umayyad. So you have the ruler, and the responsibility of the ruler is to protect the different communities. So we are not paying the dimny, but that's not very far. But that's the same conception. And I would say this is a conception of the Middle East. So the Middle East lived in peace. So conversely, so you're historians, most of you, so and you know that precisely because of these consensus, so the ruler protects the different communities, and Christian, Jews, and Muslims used to live together in peace. So and look at it and the exchange and so on. That's more that. So they try to perhaps to take the best from this reading of the tradition, but also to reinvent a kind of tradition. So
okay, thank you.
Yes.
That's also very important in a global world to say, look, you see, we have so this tolerance, which doesn't exist in the other states. I don't want to be too long because Gavriil will be after
Thank you.
So
thank you very much. Thank you.
Professor Paula Caballo for her question.
Thank you, Professor Gerash. It was fascinating. And let me just say that I hope this continues, because I can assure you that we will all be left with a taste of more after this lecture. From the tens of questions that I have, I will select only two. And the two of them have to do with trying to grasp somehow if there are at all any similarities between the nation building of the Emirates and the nation building process that Israel went through. And I want to refer to two characteristics. One of them is the desert. As we all know, I mean, Israel has a big desert and the Emirates, needless to say. And societies that strive for modernity but are located in the midst of a desert can use it as a means of enhancement and empowerment. And in Israel, it definitely became one of the characteristics or values of the nation building. So the slogan was making the desert bloom. And the idea was that people have to go and live in the desert. And part of that is becoming the nation in the desert by proving to ourselves that we can actually deal with difficulties, and then we will become even stronger, even more consolidated, all that stuff. So I just wonder if the desert has any role in the shaping of the UAE's sense of mission or collectivity or nation building. And this is also related to another characteristic which is very typical to Israeli nation building, which is the mobilization of the people, and especially the young generation. So I also wonder whether the leadership of Sheikh Zayed was also intended to mobilize the younger generation and try to distinguish them from the older generations by giving them a collective mission or collective goal that is bigger than, goes beyond their development of themselves, meaning goes beyond go and study and be more educated, but something that has to do with the greater goal of the nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. It's very clear. So the first one about the desert, yes, definitely. So Sheikh Zayed, so he's always presented as someone who turned the desert green. And it's still there in the imagination, in the mindset. It's and so the old generation is, so they are so used to go and to camp and so on. It's everywhere. It changes though with the new generation, because we have witnessed a major urbanization, not only in terms of geographic location, but also lifestyle. Meaning, so the young Emiratis, they don't feel necessarily comfortable. So with this environment, or when they go in the desert, it's to so with squad and so cars, whatever. So it's something which is absolutely not what grandfathers did. So, but yes, it's there. And the reinvention of the tradition incorporates the desert as one of the main benchmarks because it's everywhere. So you drive 10 kilometers away and you're already there, and you already have it so between buildings. So the second question about the mobilization of the young people, unlike Israel, I think that this society is very conservative and respectful of elderly people. So simply because this is how it works, not because they are more competent or whatever, but because they deserve the first place and so on. These people also, I can feel strong resistance in terms of practices shift, for instance. So, and it could be the metaphor of the UAE. It's an extremely traditional and conservative country with the threat of modernization. And it's like a big, a big hole, vacuum, because nobody knows what will be. And so the older generations are simply terrified when they look at their grandchildren. So for many reasons, but it's that. So not easy. It's very true that, well, there are so many contrasts or internal oppositions, for instance, between Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Abu Dhabi is very conservative. Dubai is very open-minded. Or Dubai open to Iran, and Abu Dhabi very hostile. So consequently, it could be also the same with the young generations. If for them, for instance, when they live in Dubai, they feel more comfortable to be what they want to be, or to be not exactly in the tradition. So I have some young women, for instance, they don't want to get married, and they don't want to get married to in the traditional way.
I didn't see he has a call.
He's not with us. I can ask, but he won't.
No, wait.
No, wait.
He has a battery. He said he had something with
a battery issue. That's what I said you can ask, but now I see.
Oh.
Sorry for that. I'm not tech savvy at all, and all right. So I'm listening, Ella. I'm very sorry.
All right. It's all right.
Okay. So I am introducing again. We are going to do the editing here. Professor Avi Bar-Eli, the floor is yours for your question.
Thank you, Professor Γκερές, for your illuminating presentation. Naturally, we are all quite curious about the Emirates after the peace accord or the normalization accord with Israel. And I wanted to ask you two questions. The first one concerning the relation between the collective nature of the Emirates and what is referred to in its constitution as the Great Arab Nation. We know that there is a tension between local identity or local collectivity and pan-Arab nationalism in places like Egypt, Syria, Iraq, are bordering Jordan. Is it the case in the Emirate? Do you find such a tension in the Emirate? That's my first question I wanted to pose. Another concern is concerning what you called Emiratization or nationalization. I guess those two terms refer to the same process. How how this process is applied on the 7 million non-Arabs. What is the meaning of this process concerning those this vast part of the population? Are this process aiming? Is it aiming towards reducing their influence? What is
we will need to wrap it up at 2, but hopefully we will be able to continue this in another session.
Because there are some questions that are important, and of course, I don't know, Professor Γκερές, if you have heard Avi Bar-Eli's question.
No, I heard, no, not Eli's, I heard Avi's questions, but so I can briefly answer to Avi if you want to.
So now it is the answer, I am doing that for the editing. It is the answer of Professor Γκερές to the question that has been posed by Avi Bar-Eli.
All right, so to the point, not in the right order, but for the temporary population. So the first chapter of my book was invited at the Sultan's court. It's very important to keep in mind that if you're not an Emirati, you're in the UAE on a temporary base. It could be for tourism, it could be for, we would say in Europe, literally for mission. But whether you like it or not, you have to leave this country. And that's probably why I understood that very soon that I'm still there, because you cannot feel this, you cannot have this feeling of entitlement, for instance, and to say, well, I've worked in this country, I contributed to its prosperity. Absolutely not. You're invited, and as a good guest, at some point, you need to leave. So very important. There is no crucible of nations. We are absolutely not in a Western conception of a nation, like in Western Europe, France, or the United States, or Canada, Australia. So absolutely not. So it's, and precisely based on these blood conceptions, so we are the Arabs, so we are going to maintain these identity and purity of blood among us. So not easy to understand when you look at Dubai, and it looks very, very warm. And even for the Arab, and that's the reason why. So that could be the second question. So that's the reason why. In the 1990s, there were a big change, a change in manpower. Instead of Arab labor, it's Asian labor, because they are not Muslim, so no solidarity with this Arab, and so they have no claim, and they cannot, at some point, claim the Emirati citizenship. The Arabs, yes, if you speak the language, if you live there, if you and so on. So as a result, so this looking east policy was also a way to address and to circumvent the Arab issues in the region. Could be the Muslim Brotherhood or Nasserism, whatever. So all kind of left-wing opposition. So and for the tensions, yes, of course there are tensions, and they are everywhere. But we are in a phase society when you never discuss openly your problems. It's even with your neighbors. Now, look, for instance, as far as I'm concerned, I was very surprised with the situation in Qatar. I've told my students since June 2017, they will come back. And it will, because geography speaks for itself. So as a result, so they will be your neighbors. But I had no clue that it would be so fast. Why? Because we have this tradition of discussing behind closed doors. There is no transparency. That's the culture. It's not because they want to hide something or whatever. That's it. And especially with foreigners. So you try to read the omens, and sometimes it's like you can see some slight changes, but you never have access to real information. So that's why for people used to debate and to argue in politics, it could be very difficult. So.
Okay, very interesting, and that it's a good time to ask about the significant other in the foreign policy of the UAE. You talked about Qatar, and what we have seen in the last 10 years, while we see the foreign policy of Qatar in many other subjects in the Arab world, in Syria, its relations with Saudi Arabia and the rest of the countries in the GCC, the special relation that Qatar has with Turkey, we saw these 10 years that Qatar was a country that was doing something new in the foreign policy, which gave and seemed to give a distinct nation-building show-off, let me say, in the media and also in politics and outside of the Arab world. And we see this last 6 months from August until now, that the UAE is differentiating itself by the rest of the Arab world, as has been done by Qatar. We see that the UAE had a certain role, a military role, even before, in the Syrian civil war. But now we see that it has a role in Libya. Changed the consensus over the subject of Sahara. And of course, they changed the conception of what we knew about the Arab-Israeli history by signing this agreement in August. And at the same time, we see that the UAE is not so friendly, or was not so friendly with Qatar, as you have said. I would like to ask you, as Qatar saw its foreign policy as a form to promote its nation-building idea and conception and self-conception, does the UAE go through the same path that Qatar has opened for itself?
I think that you can put a PhD student on this topic because it's layered. There are different layers, and it will be difficult to address this question in little time. What I can say is don't be fooled by the surface, because Qatar is also a very conservative society. The modus operandi is perhaps different. However, I think that it's as conservative as Saudi Arabia for us Westerners. So, and the Muslim Brotherhood, well, we have heard about them, so from 2011 onwards. However, so they are still there since the 1960s, and they are ingrained, deeply entrenched in the state apparatus, in education, for instance. Qaddafi was the main character of the Muslim Brothers there. So he worked in the Ministry of Education, so he worked in Qatar University, and so on. So, well, so it's the branding of Qatar is different. That's a technique of marketing to promote the state, not necessarily what they like. And definitely, like in the UAE, the population, or we are not talking about the Doha Street like in Egypt. However, the people, they don't necessarily like these very glamorous policy. That's the first thing. And yeah, there are differences. However, something that we need to refer to is Ibn Khaldun. So very important, because when he describes the Asabiya and how the Arabs interact, it's exactly the same. We have the same pattern with what we state. It's not with families, it's with or tribe or sub-tribes, but it's with states. So even fighting against your neighbor is a way to maintain a relation. That's very difficult to, and that's what I said to my students. So this dispute will end. It's just a matter of time, because they are part of the Arab nation. And so it's like in the family. So when you have tensions within the family, whether you like it or not, at some point, so the persons remain related. And that's what happened. And that's the reason why we have seen this very quick reconciliation. So because there are major threats, so probably more important than this. And finally, it's better for all GCC states to agree on a common agenda for their own security.
And just a final point that we might be interested in. After the normalization between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain, and now that Qatar has returned into its GCC family, could you see, having in mind that also Israel and Qatar are in a certain kind of dialogue as far as it is concerned about Gaza, can you see that we might see a normalization between Israel and Qatar after all? Just your opinion, which is not a matter of this lecture, and just a thought.
I don't know, because but what I'm sure about, it's the Israelis, they might not keep the secret very long if they negotiate with Qatar. So that's and that was precisely what. But frankly, I don't know. And why not? It will depend on the regional situation. At the moment, so I think that we can see the making of new geopolitical blocks, so much uncertainty in the region, everywhere, so globally in the region. So frankly, I don't know. So, and no, now I was careful, but after the Abraham Accords and what happened last week, I would be extremely careful, because it's so surprising and well, so it's that's also
okay. So we will sit. We will wait. What is going on? It's very interesting. Yes, Professor Caballo.
Can I just? I'm just really curious. I mean, now that we're at the end of our lecture and our meeting, I'm just curious if you think that other scholars from the Emirates would be interested to engage in such dialogues. I mean, is there just like as you can see, there's a lot of curiosity from our side. I wonder if there's also curiosity from the other side, and do you think that it will be possible to engage in mutual academic discussions in the near future?
Oh, certainly. The question is in which direction? So, That's the if it's to work on food security, well, probably, but also that's it depends on artificial intelligence. Definitely, there will be some connections or intelligence. So it's already there for why. So it might continue, but otherwise. Paula, it's very, don't forget that almost, well, probably 95% of the faculty of the professors here, so they are now not Emirati. And so we are here on a temporary base. So when and everybody is extremely careful to see that. So. And also depending on your scope of research and so on. So,
okay.
As far as I'm concerned, I have accepted the fact that I can leave tomorrow if I have to. That's that's how it works. Yes, but although yes, perhaps yes.
I have the feeling that this meeting and that we had it is a good start. What we're going to do and what we hope that we can do from Ben-Gurion University of the Negev with your university, University of Wollongong in Dubai, and